Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Cyborg Conspiracy, which will be released on May 15th of this year. So, depending on when you're listening to this, it may already be available, or you should be pre ordering it right now. It is the third book in a trilogy so far. Um, and the first book, Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, is available as a paperback, an audiobook narrated by the exquisite David Radke. You're listening to this, so I assume you like listening to things. Or the ebook is free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. So get hooked on my story about 11-year-old boy detectives that fly around on jetpacks and blow giant robot bees out of the sky with EMP blast rifles. Once you're hooked on the story, you come back and you see me with some cash for Banneker Bones and the Alligator People, and then May 15th, Banneker Bones and the Cyborg Conspiracy. Under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, I've written horror stories for older readers, such as the young adult novel All Together Now a Zombie Story, and The Book of David, which is a 5-volume serial horror novel in the style of Stephen King. It's about an atheist that purchases a haunted house that then begins to give him religious visions involving flying saucers. So it is out there nuts if you're curious. It's 5 chapters, or you can get the entire thing as a compilation if you just want to dip your toe in. The ebook for The Book of David by Robert Kent is also free to download whenever you're watching this or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. So check those out. As always, for more information about the show, more information about me, and everything else you ever wanted to know, head to middlegradeninja.com. You can read hundreds of interviews with literary agents, authors, editors, folks you would be interested in. You can also, if you're hearing a bell run past, esteemed audience, that's my cat. Just kind of streaking across the screen. You know what? We're done with this. MiddleGradeNinja.com. Check out all the interviews. You'll have a great time. Tonight, I couldn't be more excited. We're going to be talking with Joy McCullough about her new book, A Field Guide to Getting Lost. Joy, how are you this evening?
I'm great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for making the time. I'm really looking forward to chatting about this book and about all things related to your writing career.
Thank you. And congrats to you on an upcoming release. That's exciting.
Thank you. It will be afterward. Right now, it's still...
right.
Have I done everything I need to do?
Yeah,
Have
sure.
I told everybody? But I don't know. At this point, is that old hand for you? Getting ready for a book launch, or is it still exciting every time?
Well, so I only have one book that's out, and Field Guide is my second to come out. So no, it's not old hat at all. I'm ramping up. I've got a little over a month till Field Guide comes out as of our recording of this. So yeah, no, I'm also in that lead up, making sure that I'm ready, but there's really nothing left I can do. So.
Oh, well, come on this podcast, tell everybody to get excited, get ready.
That's not like I have to do this thing, you know.
And you've done some uncredited middle grade novels as well, but are we not talking about those?
I have done work for hire stuff, but my name's not on them, so I don't promote them. It's really just doing the work of the writing, and then they're out of my hands. So, yeah, it's very different.
So just the pure experience and the joy of creation without any of the burden of having to go out and say, it's me, I did it.
It's not, there's not as much joy of creation either, because it's usually fairly prescriptive of what I'm doing, and I'm doing it for someone else's vision. So it's not at all the same thing as my own stories that I'm writing because I have to tell them.
Gotcha. So probably the best place to start is, rather than me fumbling through bits of your biography and trying to tell you about you, is if you would go ahead and give esteemed audience just kind of an overview of your career thus far and how you're coming to us tonight.
Sure, great. I went to college for theater. I went to Northwestern University in Chicago, and I had been doing theater my whole childhood and through high school, and went to study theater at Northwestern. And I did act, but I also at Northwestern became much more focused on playwriting. That was my focus, and I came out of school still doing some acting, but really focused on playwriting and wanting to be a playwright as my career. And I did that together with a lot of teaching, like classroom arts residencies, where I'd come in for 10 weeks and teach a playwriting unit, something like that, which was a lot of fun. But it's pretty impossible to make a living as a playwright.
So you said I need to become a writer, and that'll
right. So I'll write novels. No, that wasn't quite the jump. But it was really tricky, and so I was always doing all kinds of extra freelance work as I could get it, writing things usually, and I substitute taught. But it was when my kids, so I have a 9-year-old and a 14-year-old, and when my 14-year-old was born, excuse me. First of all, it is really hard to do theater when you have small children because it involves being out of the house at night so much. Some people do it, and I don't know how. So that made it trickier for me to do theater. But also, my daughter was this incredible book lover. Her first word was book. And from the time she was
right, you're raising her right.
Right. From the time she was able to like sit up, we were reading picture books for hours a day. By the time she was like 3, we were reading middle grade. We were reading Chronicles of Narnia and Roald Dahl and the Ramona books.
She's following along with the story.
Yeah, she was 5 when we were reading through the Harry Potters. So I started. I've always been a storyteller, right? And story used to come to me as that would make a good play. But I think because I was spending hours and hours and hours a day reading middle grade novels, that's how story started to come to me. And I started to think, maybe I can write a novel. Because I'd always thought, I only write dialogue. I'm a playwright. I only write dialogue. I could never write a novel. I could never do any kind of description. Because as a playwright, I'm used to working with designers, and directors who bring their vision. And I don't think visually. So I thought there's no way I could create the whole world myself. But in reading and reading and reading to my daughter, I started to think in terms of middle grade novel. So I tried my hand at writing. I started with middle grade. And I had a long road. I wrote 10 novels before I got published. And actually, I'll back up. I wrote and queried 5 middle grade novels before I got my first agent. And then that agent put that novel on submission, and I kept writing, and she kept putting them on submission, and I had 3 books go on submission with her before I ended up parting ways with her and getting my current agent. But all told, I had 5 books go on submission to editors before my debut deal happened. So it was a long road. And then my debut was Bloodwater Paint, which is a YA novel. And of those 10 books I wrote, 8 of them were middle grade. So I happened to debut in YA, but I feel much more like a middle grade writer. I always felt a little bit like a weird sort of imposter in the YA community, because I just felt like I belonged with middle grade so much more. But it's just the way it worked out that my debut was this YA novel in verse, historical. And I'm really excited that now I'm finally going to have a middle grade novel out in A Field Guide to Getting Lost.
Well, that makes sense. I was looking through your background, your first novel, and I said, okay, well, this is, and then I read the book after I read your background, because I read your background, like, this is a pretty serious historical young adult novel. Lots of fairly serious themes, a lot of serious plays that you've written and had produced that are available, some information on your website. And then I picked this up, I'm like, how did we get here? This feels like a left turn, but now I'm hearing that no, everything else was the left turn. This was the true north all along.
Absolutely, that is true. Yes, I love middle grade, and I'm continuing to work in YA, but I'm really excited to also have this middle grade avenue, and it's nice to have them both because my second YA is also darker, heavier themes, and I really like having the middle grade to also sort of balance that out for me, just emotionally, what you go through as a writer when you're working on something. It's nice to have the light and the hope of the middle grade to balance out some of the darker young adult stuff that I do.
Yes, it's a nice reprieve for me if I've just written a terrible horror story. Not terrible, I love them, but
Yeah,
I've really tortured my characters in all sorts of unspeakable ways.
sure.
Then it's like, oh, I'm back, I'm safe. We can take a little break. But then when all that gets to be too nice, I know there'll be another horror story waiting for me.
Well, right. Sometimes that darkness is where I'm at, and that's what I need to express. But yeah, having the light place to go back to too is really rewarding.
So since you kind of put it on Main Street, I don't feel that it's unfair to ask for those. You said 5 novels before. You had one that was submitted in plus a relationship with an agent that just didn't work out. But I'm sure you learned a tremendous amount from that experience. What kept you going all during that time?
Yeah, and absolutely. I don't mind talking about this at all. And I'm actually anybody who follows me on Twitter, I talk a lot about how long my road was, and I talk a lot about having had to break up with an agent because I think there's so much of this stuff we don't talk about. And we're all on this journey, and some people it's longer than others. But even if the first book you write sells, there are so many parts of the journey that are a struggle, and that it's really easy to feel alone and like you're the only one who's ever struggled with these things. So I think the more that we can talk about them, if you're comfortable, I think that helps other people feel like, oh, she didn't get her first novel published; she had to write 10. Um, so that's why I'm very open about it. As for what kept me going, so the number one thing is my community. I have had wonderful critique partners from the very beginning. With my very, very first novel, I was listening to some of your episodes, and I saw that you had Jessica Lawson on. And Jessica, who's a middle grade author of, of upcoming, her 5th book is coming up. But The Actual and Truthful Adventures of Becky Thatcher was her first novel. And she and I became friends and critique partners like 10 years ago, way before either of us had gotten an agent.
So were you a critique partner on Becky Thatcher?
Yeah, I was. I was a critique partner on like her 3 novels before that. And then I was with her on Becky Thatcher. She got an agent first. She has read absolutely everything I've ever written. And she's my oldest critique partner, but she's not my only one. I have just this wonderful community. And so having that community is just huge because, and not only for the critique, and which is valuable for sure, of your work, but also just for the emotional support, the people who are at a similar stage to where you're at, to be able to understand and commiserate with you when you get an agent rejection, or celebrate you when you get a pull request, or whatever it is. So that community is the number one thing. The other thing I would say is that I learned this as a playwright. I have always been very good about starting the next project as soon as the last one's out the door. So as soon as I start querying a book, I would be starting to write the next one. And that way, as the rejections start rolling in, I would be in that really exciting phase where you're just starting a new book and there's so much possibility. And I would always, without fail, end up much more excited about the thing I was working on. So that when rejections would come in, I'd go, it doesn't matter because I don't want that one anyway. It's this new one that's going to be the one. So keeping focused on that next new thing. And that has remained true even now that I'm published. You still have things go on submission. You still get rejections. And so getting excited about the next thing I'm working on continues to be a thing that sort of propels me along.
So I have lots of follow-up questions for that.
Okay.
First, since you mentioned that you're giving out this advice for free on Twitter, what's your Twitter handle where everybody can go and follow you now?
It's JMC Writes, like Joy McCullough, JMC. And I'm on there more than I should be. Although recently I have used the Freedom app to limit myself, so I only have access during a couple of hours a day. So it's working well to cut down for me. But I'm still around, and I'm really, really open. If people are having agent struggles, like a lot of people DM me, and they're welcome to, or just questions about publishing or whatnot. I love to share the information I have, because it was so hard fought.
So when you were getting started and there was no Joy McCullough that you could direct message and ask directly, how did you find your critique partners, and how did you find your way?
Yeah, so, it's interesting. It's been about 10 years that I've been in this Kidlit community, and it has changed a lot, because when I was first starting, blogs were the big thing. So I met Jessica she had a blog. She still has it, called Falling Leaflets. And I happened to come across it and read about her and what she was working on. And she had 2 small kids, and she just seemed like someone I'd get along with. And so I just sent her an email saying, "Hi, I read your blog, just wanted to say hi." And she wrote back, and we just struck up a friendship. And I think that not approaching it in terms of, I got to find someone who's going to read my manuscript and give me feedback. Rather, approaching it in terms of, I want to build relationships with other people in this community, And so once we had built this relationship, then it was a natural thing for, I don't even remember who asked first, but one of us to say, "Hey, do you want to trade 50 pages and see how we respond to each other's work?" And it grew from there. So blogs are one place. Absolute Right was a writing forum. It still is, but I don't know how active it is, because message boards aren't as much a thing as they used to be, I think. But that was a place where I asked a lot of my questions, where there were some really wonderful established authors who were there, who would answer questions. And I think I found a couple critique partners there. There were a couple of blogs who would do like critique partner matchups, where you could say, "I'm writing a middle grade that's a fairy tale retelling," and blah, blah, blah. And somebody else could just see that and say, "Hey, that sounds like something I'd like to read." So it was sort of, there wasn't one place that I would find critique partners, but it was just sort of putting my feelers out into the community and finding the different avenues to get to know people and making it relationship first. And then from there, I have built just a really wonderful network of people who are critique partners, but really they're dear friends first.
Makes sense. And man, you couldn't have done better than Jessica Lawson. She's one of my most favorite people. I reached out to her. I think she reached out to me. I don't remember which. But we've been online friends just forever, which is why it was such a thrill when we were finally talking in person on the podcast, because we've been emailing for years. I'm just a huge fan of everything she's ever written. She's fantastic.
She's marvelous.
And so if you're Jessica Lawson certified, my esteem for you just doubled.
Excellent.
So how, I promised the esteemed audience before we're done, we are going to talk about a field guide to getting lost, available now. But how did you go from playwriting to being able to fill in description, fill in all those character details, everything that intimidated you? Because as I read this, I couldn't help but notice it's not a script. it's a full story, very expertly written. So how did you go about learning the craft to transition from one type of writing to the new one?
Like I said, we were reading aloud so much with my daughter. And I think that's the advice I give to anyone who comes to me and says, we all hear it as writers. "Oh, I want to write a novel." So many people say that like they could just do it if they sat down and did it. But what I always recommend is you need to read, and you need to read voraciously, and you need to read within the category that you want to write. If you haven't read kids' books, since Roald Dahl, you have a little bit of catching up to do. So I had been reading so much middle grade aloud that it wasn't a matter of sitting down to study how description worked, but it kind of seeped into me because it was literally hours a day. There was a point when partly I was exhausted, and I was like, I almost couldn't believe how much we were reading, and I spent about a week tracking the minutes we would read and the hours. And this was, my daughter was like 4. It averaged 5 hours a day of reading aloud. She didn't do preschool. And so we would just sit and read all day. So that's how I figured it out, I think, is so much reading. And I think also reading it aloud gives you sort of a different layer on it than necessarily just reading it on the page. So it really just sort of became part of me. I didn't set out to learn the craft or read anything in particular about this is how you write a children's book. I read, and then I tried writing.
You managed to both win parenting and writing.
She's still a big reader too.
And I know that you were obviously all about acting and playwriting. So when did you make the transition from I want to be an actor of someone else's words to I want to write those words? And when was it just when you were reading so much that you had that inkling of, oh, I could also do fiction? Or had you had aspirations before that?
So in terms of the acting to playwriting, when I went to Northwestern, part of their theater program is that no one's allowed to come in and just say, I'm an actor and all I'm going to do is act. They require you to learn all the different elements of the theater, and you have to take design classes and you have to stage manage and you have to do everything. And even if you end up being only an actor, that is really valuable because you're a better actor if you understand what goes into all the other disciplines around you, right?
And more employable between gigs, I imagine.
Well, that's true too, yeah. And so I came in very open-minded, and I ended up having a playwriting teacher who was just incredibly inspiring. His name is John Logan, and he won the Tony Award for Best New Play for a play called Red, but he's probably better known to a wider audience in film and television. He's the creator and writer on Penny Dreadful, and he also has been nominated for several Academy Awards for Hugo and Gladiator and The Aviator. So, but at the time, he was still at Northwestern. He's not anymore. Teaching playwriting.
You're spending all that Gladiator money, my God.
Well, it was funny because when I was in college, he was just starting to get a name in Hollywood. And so he would fly to LA for most of the week. And then he would fly to Chicago. We would have one class a week that was 3 hours long because he spent most of the week back in LA. And then he'd come back to teach his class and then he'd go back to LA. But he was incredibly inspiring. And I happened to also have an acting professor that year who I loathed. And so it's sort of the power of the right teacher, you know. I had this playwriting professor who was just incredibly magnetic and wonderful and who saw something in me and put a lot of time into me, and this acting teacher who was not any of that. So yeah, I went toward playwriting largely because of him and that class, and I wrote my first full-length play in college and it won an award and got fully produced. So I was on that path of this is what I'm going to be doing, playwriting, as soon as before I left college and when I got out of college. I never thought about fiction for a second until, like I said, when my kids were small and I really couldn't do theater anymore and I was reading so much fiction.
I'm a big believer that every writer should take an acting class. I know when I talked with Lance Rubin, who was also an actor for a long time, turned young adult novelist, and still actor, I think. We were both adamant that this is, my high school musical days have come in handy the rest of my life. I figured out pretty early on I didn't have the determination to be an actor. I'm looking at Christian Bale like, wait, you got to lose how much weight within how much time? Yeah, no, that's not me. I'm going to write something. But that still comes in handy. It's coming in handy right now, hosting a podcast, and having that poise just to get up on stage or any event that you're ever going to go to promote your work. But it also really helps to learn how to know the interior workings of a character intimately in a way that writing the overall story doesn't necessarily lend it to, although it's more fun because you get to be all the characters.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I also think the ability to make bold choices, good actors are willing to make really bold choices, particularly in like rehearsal and stuff when they're still exploring a character. And, something bold, even when it ends up being wrong, is a lot more interesting than just a, flat sort of careful performance. And I think the same is probably true in writing. You've got to go for it and try it. Unless you try it, you won't know. I never liked improv. I'm far too in need of control. But I think that an improv class is something that probably everybody would benefit from too. And like you said, in hosting this podcast, and as an author, you end up talking to groups of people and doing book events. I had the great fortune to meet Laurie House Anderson a few years ago, just very briefly. And in my brief moments with her, she said, "Here's my advice to you." She knew my debut novel was coming out. She said, "Are you an introvert?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Okay, yes, me too." She said, "So is everyone else in this room," which was a huge mixer of authors and teachers of English at the NCTE conference. And she said, "You learn how to play a character that is your author character, and that's what you put on when you're doing a cocktail party like this, or you're doing a school visit, or you're doing a whatever." And it's not that you're inauthentic, but if I was 100% authentic, I would be in my pajamas, not talking to anyone, right? But it's a form of acting, and I'm able to draw on that because when I do events and whatever, I'm able to be this author person. And sometimes when my kids see me, they just think it's so weird because I'm not really out there like that in day-to-day life. And then they'll see me do an event and they're like, "What are you doing?" But
Mom's wearing pants and leaving the house. What is that?
Right. It's very strange for them to see me talking to people.
That's when my son gets. That's how I knew I was working from home too much. My son would get antsy if he saw me put on actual pants instead of sweatpants. Like, "Oh no, Daddy's gonna leave."
Oh yeah, my kids do that too. If I am dressed in anything but pajamas, they get this panicked look. Not so much my 14-year-old, but my 9-year-old. "Where are you going?" He knows I'm going out.
And I had you said something earlier, and I've been struggling with this myself. So I'm going to follow up. You mentioned Twitter. You're very open about your experiences, about what's happened to you as a writer. And I'm always wondering, where's the line? Twitter, one, annoys me a bit because I know it's terrible for me. And I'll read it for a while, and then I'll start to feel worse than when I before. And I'll put that down,
Yeah.
read a book, listen to a book, no more of that. Which is why if you follow me on Twitter at MG Ninja, you can look forward to about 1 or 2 tweets a week, because that's about what I've got in me. I'll tweet about the podcast. I might say something helpful to another writer, but I do watch other writers on there, and I really appreciate people demystifying this, being open, being honest. There was an Authors Guild survey that just came out here. We're talking in March, and it just came out in February, and then this will be available closer to launch. I believe they said that over 80% of authors that they surveyed were reporting income of right around $13,000 for the year, which is why you want a day job for most authors as well, and that it's not information that is typically widely available. And so I'm forever meeting authors, and they'll confess that to me after they get to know me, and we're comfortable like that. And they know I'm not going to repeat it. And they think, well, I must be the only one. I'm the one that's struggling financially, and if I did this, this, and this, that I would have all that John Green money, or that Tomi Adeyemi money. That's where it's at. And then, so I applaud and appreciate this open community of authors supporting each other and sharing information. But I also see authors sharing when it's maybe the modest Hoosier in me, where I feel it's oversharing. I don't have rent this month. I'm going to be evicted from my apartment. Things of that nature. And I suppose it's on an individual level, but where for you is the line? What's okay to share? What's not okay to share? Or is it a moving target for you like everybody else?
I think it's a moving target, and I think it is just very individual. I think it's sort of what you're comfortable with. And so for some people, they might be even just talking about like publishing journey. They don't want to talk about the fact that they had to part ways with an agent, and so they don't need to, so I think it's for the people who are comfortable talking about those things, then that's going to help other people, but there shouldn't ever be like a pressure that you need to talk about certain things. But I think that there are definitely people who and I actually count myself in this to a certain degree, who really don't have a lot of in-person social connections, right? We sort of live more and more isolated lives, but some people are isolated by other circumstances, disabilities, whatnot, and so the people in their computer are their friends. And my critique partners, I've met several of them, but like Jessica Lawson, who has been one of my best friends for 10 years, we've never met in person. And so I think that some people come to feel like, oh, this is my community of friends, and so then they're very open. I'm not as open about like really personal stuff like that. That's just like a comfort level, and it might also be an age thing. I think I see more younger authors being really open about more personal stuff. And so, but I'm in my 40s and I didn't grow up with the internet. So maybe it's a little bit different to me, but yeah, I just think it's down to personal comfort. And there are a lot of things about Twitter and other social media sites that are negative, and there's like so much comparison and stuff can be really hard on an author. But on balance, I have just learned so much. I have been exposed to voices I wouldn't have been exposed to. And in addition to sharing like about the publishing journey, oh, you might hear my dog bark. For example, authors being open about mental health stuff, which might be something that feels too personal. Seeing people be really open about their anxiety and their issues led me to realize, oh, I might be able to get help for how I feel all the time. And I went to a psychiatrist and got medication that has made me so much healthier. And that was from seeing other people talk about their mental health issues and be open about that. So to me, that ended up really being meaningful and useful. So I think, you don't know who you're going to touch when you're open. And you don't know who might reach out and help you. So if somebody is going to be evicted and, shares that, well, somebody might see that and have a way to help them. And so I think they're finding connection where they can find it.
Well, the other thing that worries me is when I see authors saying, this agent whose name is a terrible person, and any other agents who might pick me up, just know that one day I might talk about you.
Yeah, no, that's a definite something I wouldn't be open about. I'm open about how long my journey has been and whatnot. But when I was querying, I never would have talked about how many rejections I was getting at the time, or certainly never would have named agents. That's bad behavior.
Well, since you were further open, I promise one more question, and then we'll get to a field guide to getting lost, because I really do want to talk about this book, and then I'm gonna circle back and probably ask you some more things about your career thus far, because you've done a little bit of everything. There's no end to the questions I have for you. But since you mentioned dealing with anxiety, taking medication, something that I know is not true, but I'm going to play devil's advocate and ask the question anyway, because I know it's a common misnomer among authors, this thought that my depression, my anxiety, my fill in the blank is part of what makes me this great twisted artist. And where would we be if someone had given Nietzsche antidepressants back in the day? Did you find or notice a difference in your writing when you addressed that issue?
Yeah, I think that's such a damaging attitude. I don't know. I'm trying to think about the timeline to when I did that. I think I got mental health help right around the time that my debut Deal book sold. And at that time, and I was working on this book that was with very, very heavy issues. And I think that I was having increased anxiety because I was so immersed in a lot of really difficult stuff. So I don't remember exactly timeline wise if that was when I sought help, but I think it was around there. But yeah, I wouldn't say that I don't think that it affected, like took away my creativity or anything to be on medication. It made me able to breathe, which is necessary for me to be able to create. I was I mean, I think it improved my writing really because I was writing before, but I was under so much weight. And the medication, which I'm not saying is right for everyone, but it was right for me, and it lifted some of that weight off. I could breathe. It made it easier to create. So for me, yeah, it's a necessary thing. It's like if I had a heart condition, it's the same thing.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I know there's somebody listening right now who's having that same thought that I don't know if I want to give this up. Let them know it gets better. Get your house in order. Your writing does not benefit from your suffering unnecessarily.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to write, if you're like, oh, but I'm writing YA and I want to write this tortured character, you'll still have access to those emotions, right? I still know what panic attacks feel like, even though I don't have them as frequently, right? It's not going to erase everything you've ever experienced. And it doesn't mean you won't ever have anxiety or panic attacks anymore. So even if you want to write about that, you don't have to be in the middle of it. You'll still know what that all feels like.
Yeah, no, it won't be forgotten. Well, this is my favorite thing. I love chatting with authors and getting to pick your brain, and I'll do it all night if you let me. But I'm going to stop myself here because I also know somewhere as a publicist, an agent, who knows, listening and saying, "Are you going to talk about the book?" Yes, my God, let's talk about the book. So probably the best place to start. I don't summarize other people's biographies, and I don't summarize other people's books because I'll spoil the whole thing. So if you would, tell our esteemed audience a little bit about your new book, A Field Guide to Getting Lost, available now wherever fine books are sold.
Sure. So Field Guide is a contemporary middle grade novel about Sutton and Louise. And Sutton is a girl who is very science-minded. She's into coding. She really likes botany. Her parents are divorced, and she lives with her dad, and her mom is a research scientist who's away a lot. Louise is very creative. He's into fantasy. He's writing a fantasy novel. His father died when he was small, so he lives with his mom. And what they have in common is that neither of them like to be outside. Sutton, mainly because she always likes to be at her computer with her devices doing that work. And Louise, largely because he has a bunch of life-threatening allergies. But their parents, Sutton's dad and Louise's mom, start dating. And so they have to... they meet, and yeah, they have to sort of figure out how to get along from there.
I felt I was excited to talk with you because Banneker Bones is an inventor who works with robots, and then his cousin, who's suddenly come to live with him, is a creative type who wants to do some form of writing. I'm like, yes, Joy and I, we're going to see eye to eye. We're going to be all right.
Yeah, that's great. To be honest, I don't have very much knowledge of coding and robots and all that. I had to do some research on that end because I'm much more of a Louise than a Sutton.
You certainly wrote about it more than well enough to completely convince any skeptic. So let's start there. What kind of research did you do to make sure that you could convincingly write about these things?
Well, thankfully, I didn't have to get too involved, because it's a middle grade novel and we don't learn a lot about what Sutton's doing. She's trying to code a robot to go through a maze. And my kids have these they're called Ozobots. They're in a lot of the schools, but they're these little ping pong ball sized things that you can code to go through a maze. So yeah, I did ask. I actually I reached out on Twitter when I had some questions saying I need help from coding minded people. And a couple people, volunteered, and I just asked them my questions, and they let me know. I did research just sort of online searching when I'm trying to figure out what I'm saying. Google is a wonder. So yeah, I mean, I wasn't real in depth, but I had to research because I really don't know anything about coding. If anyone is interested in coding and middle grade, though, Emmy in the Key of Code by Amy Lucido is a middle grade novel in verse about a girl learning to code, and it gets far more in depth. Because Amy, the author, is actually a coder. So just a recommendation there.
That's a good day job. Good thinking, Amy. So, who is the ideal reader for this story, other than grown men who host podcasts and write similarly themed books?
Um, Gosh, I just think whoever sees the book or hears the book and is intrigued by the premise, or sees the cover and thinks, what are those two kids doing in the middle of the woods? I don't like to be very prescriptive about who can or should read what books, and so it's for whoever. Obviously, middle grade readers are probably my ideal audience, but I love when adults read middle grade. So I'm
You'll take the sales of.
Well, I'm sure, but not only sales, but in terms of engagement and whatever. I read a ton of middle grade just for me. I read with my kids, of course, but there are books that I read only for me, and I love them, and I love to reach out to the authors. So, of course, they're not only for kids.
When you write a story, do you have an ideal reader in mind?
No, I really don't. I just write the story, and then it either is a story that works for middle grade or YA, or to be marketed in a certain way, but I'm not being intentional about that from the beginning.
I am. I like to come up with an ideal composite reader, and then I'm forever asking myself, what will they like? What will they appreciate? And usually it's a combination of a version of young me, what sort of book would I have loved, and then also whoever I'm thinking of, depending on the story. So, but you're just writing. Are you writing for you, or are you just writing to get the best possible story? Where do you get that satisfaction for crafting the tale?
I think it probably depends a little bit on the project. My middle grade probably has my own kids in mind to an extent, certainly. I have a boy and a girl, like Sutton and Louise. But my YA, they were much too young for it when I wrote it, so that really wasn't about them. I suppose it might have been partly for young reader me, but I wasn't thinking about that intentionally. I was just writing the story.
And job well done. It worked out well.
Worked for me.
Let me ask you this obvious question, because you're alternating back and forth between Sutton's perspective and Louise's perspective. Why is that the best way to tell this story, and what opportunities did that open up for you that picking one perspective wouldn't have?
Sure. So dual POV is really tricky to pull off. I will just say as a word of warning to any writers who listen to this. But it would have been a really different book if I had chosen one of the characters' perspectives. Certainly could have worked in its way to have it just be Sutton's story or just be Louise's story. But from the beginning, I knew that I wanted to start with these two very different characters, and I wanted to bring them together and see how that would work. And so it was both of their stories in my mind from the beginning. And so I think when the whole first half of the book, they haven't even met. It's like leading up to them coming together. And so it would have been really tricky to make them both equally weighted important characters if I didn't have both of their perspectives, right? If it had only been Sutton's story and we didn't get introduced to Louise until their first coming together, Louise would have been very much a secondary character. So in order to have both of these very, very different characters sort of come together, I needed to have both perspectives. And they have some things in common, but they have such differences that I wanted each of their strengths, to be coming to what would ultimately be the problem that they have to get through in the second half of the book.
Makes 100% sense, and I appreciate you being able to answer that without spoiling. That's well. And then let me ask you this: what? Because there is a sort of sadness presented to us early on that persists. It's not a sad story. It's at times a very amusing story. It's heartwarming. It's charming. It's all those things. But you've got this detail. Well, this is chapter 1, so I don't think I have to worry about spoiling your novel if it's in chapter 1. But Sutton's mother, of course, is off studying emperor penguins. She's going to miss Sutton's birthday. She's obsessed with the penguins. Sutton starts to get some idea. What's that line from Indiana Jones? The Last Crusade? What you taught me, Dad, was that I was less important to you than people in another country that had been dead for 1,000 years. And she's getting some of that same vibe from her mom, who's really obsessed with these penguins, who absolutely are important. That is one, bad parenting. If you made the movie version of this, you'd have to do the Kramer versus Kramer and cast Meryl Streep as the mom, so we don't hate her from page 1. But also, that's such a big theme that's not what this novel is focused on. So how do you introduce something like that, be fair to the mother character, because what she's doing is important. Somebody has to look after those penguins, but without having that overwhelm the narrative.
Right. So, well, first of all, I don't think it necessarily has to be bad parenting, because I think that it's okay to show a mother with a career that's important to her. She's not in Antarctica all the time. She's there, and she's going to miss Sutton's birthday. So in the moment of the book, it is a big thing. But she lives in the same apartment building when she's home. So I think Sutton gets to spend a lot of time with her when she's there. She's a big supporter of Sutton's science. She's a scientist herself. And so we see Sutton in this moment where she feels like her mother has abandoned her. But I don't think that's all there is to her relationship with her mother, and I think if Sutton grows up to be a scientist, having had this mother who continued to pursue her career will be probably important and inspirational to her. But yeah, it is certainly a source of stress and sadness for Sutton that her mother isn't there, and she's sort of having to grapple with that. And in terms of not letting it overwhelm the story, I mean, I think that's sort of an undercurrent of what is happening for Sutton emotionally, but then the actual plot happens, and in addition to the things that are happening, there's all the other people in her world who are supporting her, who are stepping in, which not only her dad, who she has a really good relationship with, but she has these special relationships with these other older people who live in the apartment building. She's not on her own. She may feel abandoned by her mom, in the moment, but she's got a lot of support. She's got a lot of adult figures around her. And then Luis comes in to fill in a sort of more of a peer relationship. So I think having something like that, of that kind of wound, I think all characters need to have a wound. The author Robin Lefevers, who is primarily a YA author of the His Fair Assassins series, which is about assassin nuns. If you haven't read it, it's amazing.
That sounds great.
Yeah, she has a wonderful blog series of writing advice that I highly, highly recommend. And she has a series of posts about pre-writing and everything she does in preparation. And one of the things she talks about is this question of a character's wound. What is this thing that has happened to them, or what is this truth that they believe about themselves that over the course of the story needs to be overcome. And, in a lighthearted middle grade novel, it's not necessarily going to be some huge tragic backstory. But there's something for every kid who picks up a book. They have something that hurts, whatever it is. So I think being honest about that, not making characters in books look like, everything is just perfectly happy. Luis's father died of cancer when he was small. So they each have.
Yeah, no, him I gave a pass.
But they each have something, that has hurt them. But then they keep going, and they keep living, just like we all do, no matter what our wound might be.
That's how I know I'm talking to the author, because here I'd made a cold, quick, callous judgment that Mom's not there for the birthday. She's dead to me.
Well, and that's a fair assessment, and that's sort of how I present it, because that's how Sutton feels. But pulling back and looking at it a little more big picture, I think Sutton might understand her mom's choices when she's older.
We have to write the sequel, and Mom and daughter will go and study the penguins together and get all that stim in there. So many questions for you. I'm gonna move away from Mom. I've been reprimanded. Well, she's fine. I'll leave her alone. That's obviously my own issues seeping in. But Louis is a writer character, and I know I have to watch myself extra careful when I write about writers, which I've done twice now. That anything that's going to be, let's talk about writing, save that for the blog and the podcast. Don't put that in the book. So how did you discipline yourself with making him a relatable character, and obviously a writer, huge imagination, which certainly comes into play, without showing any sort of obvious bias toward the writer, and allowing that writer portion of him to kind of take over the story?
Yeah, so, Sutton came first, my vision of who Sutton was, and she was trying from the very, very beginning, she was trying to get this robot through the maze. She had a clear, tangible thing she was into and she was trying to achieve. And then I had Luis, and I knew Luis was this creative kid. He was the artsy kid. He liked fantasy novels, but I didn't have him writing a story until I understood that he needed to have something of equal weight. That's kind of the trick in dual POV, is making sure that your reader isn't racing through one character's chapters because the other character is more interesting. Sometimes you'll read a dual POV book like that. And so I knew that he needed something that he was trying to achieve, like she is with the robot in the maze. And so that's how I started to think of him as actually writing this story. And I had so much fun with it because I don't tell the whole story that he writes, but I give enough that you get a broad overview of the story he's telling, which is a fantasy that's very like at a boarding school with differing factions. It's very derivative of Harry Potter, and I don't imagine. And now I've learned to never say never, but I find it highly unlikely that I will ever write high fantasy myself. But it was a fun chance to just throw all those tropes in there and play with all those fantasy things and saying, this is what he's writing. But I think that there was just enough else going on in the book that it wasn't going to take over. There's only so much time that Luis is home working on his book because they get out and they start doing other things. So I don't think I ran that risk. But who knows? I guess that'll be up to the readers.
That's true. Well, writers are great characters, especially for adult fiction, because they're at home. Right. They have the ability to just leave the house. They don't have to worry about making excuses for the jobs. But if you present writers as actually writers, they're boring characters because they're going to sit in front of a screen all day. No, give me somebody out there.
Yeah, totally. Sometimes someone will reach out and ask if they could shadow me, to see what the job is. And I'm like, the job is sitting around in my pajamas. There's nothing to shadow. There's nothing interesting about looking at a writer do their thing.
Would you be able to do that if somebody was just sitting behind you, just staring at the back of your head?
No. No, I can't even write in coffee shops. I need quiet and solace and nobody around me.
Harlan Coben that would occasionally set up in a display window. Just move the mannequins aside. I believe it was in New York somewhere in a shopping area, and would just set up front and have a little sign there, watch Harlan Coben write his novel, and he'd just type on the typewriter. And his idea was, let me dispel this myth that there's something magical going on. It's just me sitting here producing the work. And there's merit to that, but that idea has always horrified me.
Yeah, no, I would not be able to do that. I like the idea, though.
I would just type the alphabet over and over again until I filled up 3 hours' time, and then be like, all right, now I got to go to real writing. And then There's a number of questions that I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you a little bit about allergies because of Lewis's extreme allergic reaction to just about everything, it seems, including bees. I love that he's terrified of bees. That made me instantly relate to him because that's my greatest fear is bees. And now I've just given that to all of my enemies who are listening. But I've also written about it.
Beehives on you.
How much research did you do for the allergies that Louise has to make sure that was accurate? And were you ever in a situation where you've just given him too many allergies, too many points of weakness, and you had to pull that back a little bit?
So in the original draft I sent my editor, he was allergic to even more stuff, and she made me pull it back. So the answer to that is yes. I didn't have to research bees at all because I am allergic to bees. And I have been stung and gone into anaphylactic shock and rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. Oh, so I know what that is. That was just sort of part of my life. Not as not as familiar with the sort of allergies to all the different animals and foods and things that he has. But I talked to a number of people who are allergic to those things, or moms of kids who are allergic to those things. And I also talked to some teacher friends who are sort of aware of the dynamics of kids at school who have those allergies and so have to be sort of more isolated during meal times or whatnot. So yeah, it was just a matter of talking to people who experience those things to build Louise up.
And I love that introduction with him without spoiling hopefully too much. He's been inadvertently exposed to peanuts through what seems like an unlikely way that of course has got him. I'll save that for the reader. But the friend's mom from the sleepover he's been at is just freaking out on the way to the hospital. He's calmly in the backseat. No question there. I just love that scene.
Yeah, and he's like, this has happened a million times to me. Since you know Jessica Lawson, I will point out that friend's mom's name is Mrs. Lawson, and that was for Jessica.
Oh, I didn't pick up on that at all. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
When I wrote All Together Now, a zombie story available now, there's a scene where I'm listing the names of all the characters that get eaten by zombies, and so in one chapter I killed my entire critique group.
Oh no, that's so fun.
They got a huge kick out of that.
Yeah.
And then something I wanted to ask you, and I'm going to fumble it terribly, and so I just know that going in.
I'm ready.
But you wrote, I'm going to start right here. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this right. You wrote about Artesima Gentileschi. How should I pronounce that? Okay. You wrote about her choosing between life as a nun or a paint pigment grinder, which seems like an easy choice. And she had to make several difficult choices in a male-dominated society. You wrote about Barbara Strozzi, a composer struggling against this one I'm taking directly from the quote on the play, the limits society places on women's ambition. And now in the field guide to getting lost, there's no shortage of STEM-focused women. You're very focused on strong women characters, and it's not just, that's the strong woman character. Throughout, we're presented with multiple strong female characters. And you said that you wrote Blood, Water, Paint for your daughter. So the question I'm going to fumble my way through here is, what has writing about strong female characters that are enduring sexism through history and now, and unfortunately in perpetuity, it seems like, what has that taught you about feminism, and what are you hoping that your readers are going to come away with from reading about that subject?
So, I'll say first about what I hope readers come away with, and that is to say, I don't have hopes in the same way that I don't think about an ideal reader. I don't write something with like any kind of agenda. I write the story I want to write, and I'm very, very aware that people bring their own stuff to it, and they're going to come away with what they need to come away with. And you could come away from Field Guide thinking that Sutton's mother was a terrible parent, and that's fine, because that's your perception, from coming from where you're coming from.
Great parents are good ones.
So I don't approach it thinking I'm trying to teach the reader anything, right? Because I think everybody is going to take what they need to take from a story. And that might be different depending on when they read the story. You know, if they read it a year later, it might be something totally different. In terms of feminism and strong female characters, I would say first, the label of strong female characters gets used a lot, and I understand it. But I think it's not quite right, or at least it can be perceived in different ways. But I would say that I'm not trying to write strong female characters. I'm trying to write full, complex female characters who are allowed to mess up, who are allowed to have weaknesses, who are messy and complicated. So that's what I want to write about. And I'm interested in what stories get told and prioritized in our culture, and what stories don't. So, like, for example, when I discovered Artemisia's story, she's this real historical figure, painter from the 1600s. And in the last few years, people are starting to know a lot more about her. But I discovered her story 20 years ago. I'd never heard of her. And I was horrified that this really amazing woman existed and created amazing art. And I had never been taught about her alongside the other great masters who, of course, I was taught about, but they're men. So I just think it's interesting which stories we do pass on and we do teach kids about, or anyone about, and which stories we say, well, those already happened, those don't matter. So I'm interested in those, particularly when I'm writing historically, is the stories that haven't been told. And if I'm not writing historically, I'm interested in reflecting, excuse me, characters for a reader who maybe look like what they want to be, but wonder if they can be, or who give them permission to be complicated, full, messy characters. And I don't only write for girls to empower girls. I also write for boys to read about girls who are these full, complex characters. In terms of what I've learned, I certainly learn from each book I write. Definitely in terms of craft, you know, I'm always learning what works and improving in my writing. And I learn things about myself personally on an emotional level. There's always, you know, even in lighthearted middle grade, there's stuff that comes up that I go, oh, I keep writing about this thing. What is that? You know, and so I learned that things about myself. I don't know if I learn about feminism so much as I come to writing with feminism as a part of who I am, you know, and so the stories I choose to write spring from there. Yeah, does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's the other thing that terrifies me about writing. I was talking about being concerned about tweets that get too personal, but writing is incredibly personal. And yes, your subconscious does manage to there are a couple of chapters in both of the later Bannekers that I will never read in public because I would not get through them without crying all over myself. And then I die, I suppose, on the chair and just, and that'd be it. And they both crept up and surprised me that, while I was telling my story about monsters and about adventure and about fun, this needed to express itself. And now it's on the page and everybody can see my heart laid bare.
Right. Yes.
Which is both exhilarating and horrifying.
Yep, that's sort of the whole writing process.
Here's a kind of it's a lazy question, except it's not. Because my whole concept for the show originally was one, it was going to be like a writer's conference that anybody could attend anytime. You don't have to leave your house. You don't have to put on pants. You don't have to unpause your video game. Just listen to it and learn. And two, it was going to be a show that if I went on it, I would be happy that I went on that show. I would have had a good experience. And the question that I like to ask that's kind of a placeholder, is there any question about a field guide to getting lost that you haven't answered or that you would like to answer, and feel free to answer it.
Sure. So you know what? It's funny. I have done so many interviews for Blood, Water, Paint that like I have been asked all the questions so many times. Field Guide, as of our recording, hasn't come out yet, and I've only done a couple of written interviews, and this is my first spoken interview. So there's nothing, there's like lots of questions I haven't been asked yet. But one thing I think I would mention is to talk about the setting a little bit. Which is that it is set in Seattle, and it's set with a lot, which is where I live. There are a lot of very real places. So just about everywhere that is referenced that they go, possibly everywhere, is a real place. And so it's very fun for my kids. I think it'll be very fun for anybody, who knows the Seattle area to read, to recognize the different places they go. They go to the Museum of Pop Culture, which is called the Mopop. And that's where my kids are right now. They went with their dad to the Mopop this afternoon. I love Seattle. I didn't grow up here. I've lived here for the last 20 years. And so I just had a lot of fun sort of writing a love letter to Seattle in this book. And just, they both really love it in different ways. And they live in different neighborhoods that have very different feels, but that suit them. So yeah, I had a lot of fun writing about Seattle in the book.
Did you use that as an excuse to take like field trips and go do research and make sure you had all your details correct?
I didn't. I haven't been to the Mopop in quite a few years. They go to a park that I haven't been to in quite a few years. I really take the whole writer staying at home in my pajamas thing very seriously. And if I don't have to leave the house, I don't.
Well, then what does your writing day look like? Yeah.
Well, as I've referenced a couple times, I have kids. So that's and I have homeschooled kids. So my writing day varies. And it varies also depending on where I'm at with, deadlines and whatnot. If I'm drafting something or if I'm in revisions or if I'm in copy edits. So I don't have like a beautiful, steady, I get up at 7 and I write for 3 hours. None of that. Like, too much craziness going on around me. Children have varying schedules, and there's Little League, and there's this, and there's that. So I don't have like, it's different every day. But they're old enough now, and I have an extremely involved co-parent in my husband, who, for example, took them off to the Museum of Pop Culture, so I could do this without too much.
Very Emperor Penguin of him.
Yes. But yeah, so I don't have a typical day. But I probably get in a couple hours of working on whatever I'm working on, whether it's drafting or revisions or whatnot each day. But then there's so much more to authoring in terms of promotion stuff and doing interviews and writing essays that are going to promote the book and all that kind of stuff. So keeping the website updated, all those things, it adds up to a lot. So I probably do that stuff. Oh gosh, I don't even know how much time, but I do a little bit of that stuff every day too. Some writing every day, unless I'm in a research stage, and I'm okay with that. I'm not the kind of writer who says you have to write every day. Maybe I'm in a research stage and I'm just reading about whatever I'm researching, and that is work too, and maybe I'm in a stage where I need to fill my well, and I think those stages are really important to respect. You don't always have to be writing. So sometimes I'm in a stage where either because life's too busy or because I'm just creatively spent, I'm doing other things. I'm reading and I'm watching, good TV or movies or, just filling up in other ways, which I think is really valuable. We place a lot of emphasis on how much you produce. There are a lot of people who focus a lot on word count, how many words they got written in that day. And that's great if that motivates you. But I think we also have to be mindful of you don't always have to be producing. Sometimes you need to be filling up so that then when you're ready to produce, you have something to draw on.
Makes sense. The thought that occurred to me frequently is this idea of our shared literary conversation. And so I think that if all you do is produce word count after word count, you're the person at the party that's doing all the talking.
Right.
Listen occasionally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that listening can take the form of reading, right? You're listening to the voices of other people. But that listening can also take the form of actual listening to other people. Writers, in that sense of building your community, like I talked about, but also having people in your world who are not writers, who are not involved in publishing at all, who can tell you what the outside world is like, and also who value you for something completely other than your writing, who don't care about your writing at all. They want to talk to you about whatever else, and that also fills you up as a person.
Something I learned early on that's been an invaluable research tool, but really just in learning about the world is one, tragically, I don't know everything as much as I might try. That's probably not going to happen. But two, if you sit down and look somebody in the eye at a convenient time, don't do this at the person at checkout line that's got a long line behind you. But if you find somebody they're comfortable with it, you sit down, you look them in the eye, and you listen more than you talk. People get comfortable, and they will tell you most anything.
Yeah,
and you're not a psychologist where you signed some sort of ethical agreement that I would never share this in a story. No, change all the names, but go out there and find interesting stories.
Yeah, absolutely. You can learn a lot from just listening to people.
Let's see. I have so many questions for you that I want to make sure I'm not wasting our time together. I did want to ask you about Jim McCarthy, because that's somebody that I would love to have on the podcast. So, Mr. McCarthy, if you're listening, you are welcome on anytime. We talked about the rejection you went through, the agent we won't talk about. There were, everybody tried their best. It didn't work out. How did you come to secure representation by Jim, and listen to me, I've never met the man, Jim McCarthy, Mr. McCarthy. How did you come to gain representation for him, and how did you know he was the agent that was going to bring you to Quam?
Jim McCarthy is my agent, and he's at Distal Godrich and Barrett, and he is a treasure. Because I'm so open about my struggles and my journey and whatnot, a lot of people come to me and talk to me about their agent relationships and, is this right? Is this normal? Is this whatever? So I hear a lot about other agents, and there are a lot of great agents. But Jim is, I truly believe he's the best one there is. Like, it's not one of those things where I'm like, he's really great for me. No, I really think he's the best one there is. I might be a little bit biased.
I would say that every agent who has been on this show is the best agent.
Yeah, well, you can't show bias. Although if you want to get Jim on, no, but what makes him so special is his communication. And that is the number one thing I hear from people who are having struggles with their agent, is issues with communication. And Jim's clients, we joke that if he hasn't responded to an email within an hour, we're sending out a search party because something is wrong. But as to how I signed with him, so I queried 5 books before I got my first agent. It was a lot, and it was 290 queries. I kept track. And so that was a long road. And I was with her for a few years.
Your rejection someplace where they'd motivate you to keep going?
I didn't print out the actual, because most of them were email at this point. But I had a document where I tracked who I had queried and when they responded and stuff. So that's how I was able to count how many. But my choice to part ways with her was really difficult because it had been so hard the first time, and I was absolutely convinced I would not get another agent. She had put multiple books on submission that hadn't sold, and so I thought she was the only person in all of publishing who had ever given me a yes. And so I didn't think I would find anyone else, and it was really hard, and it was only through support of critique partners and other mentor types that gave me the confidence to say, even if you don't get another agent, you're miserable right now. You will be better off, starting fresh. And so parted ways. I had a book ready to go at the time that we were starting to talk about putting it on submission. So I used it to query. And I only had to query one small batch of agents. And in that first batch of agents I queried, I got multiple offers, including Jim. And, from the first time I talked to him, he's incredibly warm. He's funny. He just made me feel at ease. Every time I talk to him, even when we're talking so he can tell me that we got a whole bunch of rejections and this book isn't going to sell, I still come away feeling better than I did before. Because he's just a lovely person, and he cares. And some agents are all business, and that works for some authors, and that's fine. But there are a fair few authors who need some hand-holding, and I think it's good to know that about yourself, because if you are that kind of person, an all-business agent isn't going to be ideal for you. They are your business partner, and that's important. But there are also agents who know how to be a bit more nurturing and hand-holding, and Jim is definitely one of those, and I appreciate it because I do rely on that. But yeah, so it was just through regular querying, no fancy pitch contests or anything. I think a lot of times people see that there's so many of these different Twitter pitch contests and things, and that's the only way to get an agent's attention, but that's just not true. Most people get their agent from regular old querying, which is how I did it, and I talked to him, and I just knew. I ended up having another conversation with another agent who offered, but I knew after the first conversation that it was Jim, and it's been, I guess we're in our 4th year, and I still just absolutely adore him. That first book that I queried him wasn't Blood, Water, Paint, so it was something else that we put on submission that didn't sell. So that continued. But he stuck with me, and he signed me on middle grade, but then he sold my debut was a YA. And then I was like, I want to try a chapter book. He sort of is willing to go with me anywhere, which I really appreciate.
So, and for all of you listening who are right this moment typing out queries to Jim McCarthy, make sure you mention you heard about him on the show and that he needs to come on the show. Let him know. But something that I know that writers who are listening are obsessed with, because I've been obsessed with it at different points, especially having been once bitten, twice shy, with having had a bad experience with an agent. You had to be extra hyper aware of what you were getting into, making sure, this is second marriage. We're going to do it right this time. So how did you go about evaluating him during that conversation? What specific things were you looking for? And I realize I'm asking you about something that worked out perfectly that happened 4 years ago, but as best you can recall.
Well, I will say, first of all, that it's not like you have to get it right the second time either. It is so common in this business for writers and agents to part ways. It happens all the time. And and sometimes it's because agents leave agenting, and sometimes it's because you decided you want to write adult and the agent doesn't rep adult or whatever. It happens all the time, and it's not a mark against you. Like if an agent sees that you have parted ways with someone else, all that shows them is that you were good enough to get an agent the first time. So it's not a bad thing, and it's not, it's not a permanent decision. If you sign with a second person and it doesn't work out, you'll query again. So I would just say that first. But then I would also say, and I didn't have the advantage of this, but if you go to Jim's Twitter, which is Jim McCarthy 528, I think. But if you search Jim McCarthy, you'll find him. His pinned tweet is a post he wrote about the questions you should ask an agent when you are having the call with them. And it's a really good post. And actually, right after he signed me, he was writing this post. And he wrote to me and said, could you send me the list of questions you asked me? Because your questions were really good. I don't really remember what my questions were, so you could consult Jim's post. But the one thing I would suggest to anybody who is getting at fielding offers from agents is you need to talk to the agent's clients. You need to talk to somebody who they have not sold a book for, because you don't want to only talk to the agent. Will give you the names of people who are super, super happy with them, right? So they're going to give you people that they know are going to say the most glowing things. But if you talk to somebody who had a book not sell with the agent, that tells you a lot about how that agent treats their clients. Because I had a book not sell with Jim, and I still never felt like I wasn't a priority to him. I still felt like he was behind me and he believed in me. And that's really important, because there are people who, when a book doesn't sell, they feel like their agent loses confidence in them, or isn't interested in seeing more from them or whatnot. So talking to multiple clients, talking to clients whose books haven't sold, if you can, is really important. That's the number one thing I suggest when talking to agents.
And it occurs to me, as we're talking about agents, we talked about writers oversharing on Twitter. Agents, watch yourself. I follow lots of agents, and I'll never reveal anybody by name, but when I see them talking about just secured a realtor's license, just found a way to get a second job, that is not something that's going to provide overwhelming comfort and encouragement to querying authors. So maybe be careful a little bit with that as well.
I think it's so hard, because it is really hard for agents to get to the point where they can make a living. They really have to have quite a stable of authors behind them before they're making enough in commissions. So I can understand what you're saying, but also a lot of agents who are just starting out do have to have some other kind of income, because I don't know how they do it. But yeah, the one thing I really don't like to see from agents is sometimes when they talk about specific things they're passing on. And if it's specific enough that a writer could see that tweet and think, oh no, they're talking about my query, that's not good, because and I could see a writer or an agent tweeting about how this portal fantasy wasn't good enough, and I don't write portal fantasy, and I would still find a way to think, oh my gosh, they meant mine. They just, like, we're so quick to latch onto things, that are our insecurities. So yeah, I don't love when I see agents referring to things they're passing on with too much specificity.
I got a terrible erotic novel today. Is that code for my middle grade book?
Right. I would find a way to do that. It's that, we all have a sort of a little tiny touch of narcissism.
I'm trying to remember who it was. One of the agents I had on said that the average is about 5 to 7 years between the time you first start selling projects and when those residuals catch up to where you are making a full-time living from agenting.
Yeah, that is a long time to get on your feet, right? And you don't have to be in New York City, but so many of them are, where cost of living is so high. Jim started at the agency that he is still at as an intern in college, and has been there this whole time, which is a stability that I really like, because a lot of agents move around so much, and that can be okay. But I really like knowing that he has a home where he is comfortable and he is likely to stay in the long term. It just feels more secure to me.
And obviously, when I'm talking about agents that I follow agents of other genres just to see what agents are up to. Obviously, anyone who's ever appeared on the show or whoever will appear on the show is an amazing agent. You should absolutely query them. These are the other agents I don't invite to come on I'm talking about. You are a Pitch Wars mentor, and I wanted to make sure I ask you about that. What is a Pitch Wars mentor, and what did that teach you about publishing, writing, both?
Sure. So I'm not a current Pitch Wars mentor, but I did mentor for 5 years. So I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of the program. Pitch Wars is a program that pairs authors who don't yet have agents with authors who do, most of which are published. Some of them are not published, but they're freelance editors, or they certainly have an agent. They're at some level of degree, like at more advanced than an author who's just querying. And they get matched up. Writers submit sample pages and a pitch, and the mentors go through submissions and pick someone to work with. And then it's a period of like 3 months where the mentor works with the mentee on their whole manuscript. And it's category specific. So if you're a middle grade mentor, and I always was a middle grade mentor, you work with a middle grade manuscript. And then it's all leading up to this agent round, where they share pitches and first pages, and a whole bunch of agents are involved and make a bunch of requests. And it's a kind of crazy time for the agents, who have to read a lot of stuff really, really fast because people start making offers on the hot items. So what I have learned from pitch wars, one thing, which I've already kind of harped on this, but I'll say it again, is the value of community. Some of my closest writing friends are my past mentees, or fellow mentors, because there's a lot of behind the scenes community with the mentors. And the mentees also have their own community where all the mentees from a certain year, are on a Facebook group together, and they support each other through all the ups and downs and stresses of it. And so just that community is so important and so useful in lifting you up and helping you celebrate. Actually, when I had my launch party for Bloodwater Paint, I had 6 or 7 former mentees who flew in from out of state to be there, because the time I had put in to their books was really important to them. And we built a relationship, and they were so excited for me when my debut novel finally came out. Several of my mentees actually got published before I ever did. But yeah, so that community is the number one thing. And I would say Pitch Wars is really selective, and there are a lot of people who apply and don't get in. And it's hard. And I think that especially when you see the flurry of people who are getting requests and book deals because of Pitch Wars, and you couldn't get in, that can be really hard to feel like you don't have access to that. I would say I never applied to Pitch Wars, but I did apply to other similar contests and never got in. So not all books are suited to that kind of contest, or you might get into Pitch Wars and then not get any requests in the agent round. That's also normal. And I had a mentee who didn't get any requests in the agent round, and her book ended up selling at auction. So not all books are suited to that. The other thing I would say I learned from Pitch Wars is, as a mentor, you get a tiny fraction of a glimpse of what agents do, in terms of you get submissions, and you get a query letter, and you get 5 or 10 pages. And from those, you can request full manuscripts, but from those, you're trying to pick one person to work with. And I used to, there's your kitty.
I just insisted on making an appearance on the show, special guest star.
I have a cat who I'm surprised hasn't come through here yet. So I used to get, as a middle grade mentor, I used to get around 100 submissions. YA mentors get even more. I think as Pitch Wars has gotten more and more popular, everyone gets more. And I learned how extremely not personal it is when an agent or an editor passes, because there were so many things that I passed on that weren't right for me, but have gone on to be published books. And maybe then I read them and loved them. Or maybe I read them and I didn't like them, and I was like, this is still not for me. But publishing is subjective, right? And I also learned how it really only took me, excuse me, it really only took me a couple pages to know when something wasn't going to be right for me. But again, that it was totally subjective, that it wasn't, and in our mentor group, we would be talking about submissions because writers could submit to multiple mentors. And there would be something that just, I didn't catch my eye at all. Other mentors would be raving about it and fighting about it, or there'd be something that I just thought was absolutely amazing, and no one else was interested in it. And part of me would go, wait, is there something wrong with me? But no, it was that this was a match for me, and the same thing is true when you're trying to get an agent. And then when you're trying to find the right editor to work with, it's so subjective, and it's hard not to take the rejections personally. But it's really not personal. It's about making the right match. So I got a glimpse of that in Pitch Wars, I think.
No, it's that bully from elementary school. Somehow they've gone on to become a literary agent, and it's personal.
Well, that might be the one case where it could be. But
that must have required all of your skills as an actress when your mentees were getting deals and you weren't, and you were Oscar clapping for the winner as a nominee. Oh, good for you. I'm not dying inside at all. I'm just
it was really hard. And even just with my critique partners, like they all got book deals before I did. And it was hard. And I definitely had major woe is me, when is it my turn moments. But I also was always completely thrilled for them. Like the two things were true at the same time. So I don't want to diminish that. Yeah, it was really hard. And I think that's really hard if you are one of the people who in your group of writing friends is one of the last to get to whatever milestone. But the great thing about that is by the time I got to my debut novel, I had so many friends who were established authors, who had multiple books out, who had already moved on to a new agent or been through all the things. So that when I was trying to figure out, is this normal, or I was stressed about this piece of debuting or that, I have so many people to turn to who can then talk to me about from their place of experience. So if you do feel like you're behind, you keep building those relationships, not so you can use them later, so you can have the relationships, but you'll have those relationships so that when you get to whatever that next step is, you've got people who are a few steps ahead who can reach back and lend you a hand. So that's the bright side of it. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say it wasn't hard, because it definitely was.
That's one nice thing about knowing so many authors. Authors, and I'm biased, of course, are generally speaking wonderful people. There's always the exception that proves the rule. But it's not like other industries. I've worked in finance where people really are clawing over each other to try and get a promotion, try and get a hit. There's some of that in publishing, but for the most part, a lot of those type A's that are the money, or the fame, they're not writing. They know better. They're day trading.
Yeah, and I think in Kidlit in particular, it's a really supportive community. It's not quite the same as my understanding in like adult markets, for example. But within Kidlit, there really is a wonderful community. And, you don't, I had to always remind myself, I didn't lose anything by someone else's success, right? And really I gained something in knowing these people who would then help lift me up. But yeah, we're all in this together.
One time it felt just a little personal. I'll share this brief story in the hopes of making an esteemed audience feel even better if they've had something similar. There was an agent I desperately wanted who turned down an early version of Banneker and then went on to purchase a middle grade book about a brilliant inventor that makes robots. Ooh. And then the next book that author wrote was a young adult novel about zombies. And I just went, come on! Oh,
man, yeah. That's really hard.
But it wasn't my zombie novel. It wasn't my
sure.
There was room for everybody, and I should thank both that agent and that person because they kept those readers engaged and reading for the time when my book was finally available.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of which, I know I've got I'm watching our time, and I know it's flying away from us as it always does. Joy McCullough, have you ever seen a flying saucer, and do you believe in them?
I have not seen one, but I certainly would not close my mind to the possibility of them existing. That's sort of all I can say. I'm not a huge sci-fi person. I don't know a lot about outer space. So, I'm not coming from a very educated position on the subject, but I'm open to possibility.
I will send you some literature, and we'll all look forward to your next book about flying saucers. It's going to be amazing.
Absolutely.
Let me fire a couple of just rapid fire questions at you, and then I'll ask you my final question, and we'll call it a night while we're still having fun before it becomes arduous. But a rapid fire question from your bio: when and why did you climb a Guatemalan volcano where you could fall in love?
So the year after college, I went to Guatemala and I lived there for a year. I was working with a children's organization down there. I was actually teaching drama to the adults on how to use it with the kids. And while I was there, I was invited to go on a hike up a volcano. It was a very big deal of hiking all the way to the top. Took a whole day, and then you spent the night at the top, and then you spent the whole next day hiking down. I, like Sutton and Louise in Field Guide, am not outdoorsy at all. And I was invited to go on this thing, and this was my year of saying yes. I was saying yes to whatever was presented to me. So I was invited, and I said yes. But I I should not have said yes. I'm glad I did because I met my husband, but I was not equipped for this. And it's a long story, but I was struggling, and we were in a group of people I just sort of peripherally knew. I was going to church with a group of young people, like teens through 20s, and there we were, and I was dying, but I couldn't go back because we would have been in the middle of nowhere just by myself. And so my husband, who I barely knew, took my stuff, carried my stuff with me because we were spending the night at the top, so we had all our overnight stuff. He carried my stuff for me. He stayed by me, even when I fell way back from the group. He just stayed with me. He was just very lovely. And then we got to the top. We spent the night at the top, and then the next day, and I didn't sleep a minute because it was freezing and we're on rocky ground, and I don't sleep outside. And then we went down, and down was easier than up, but I spent most of the time falling. And so he was there, and he was helping me up. And so that's how I met my husband. And I will never climb a volcano again. I am going to Guatemala though in just a few weeks because we got married, and he lives here now, but we go back regularly.
So he helped you through that experience, and you said, "My God, is there anything in life he couldn't help me through?"
Yes. And I will say also, he got altitude sickness, and I helped him some too on the thing. So it was a mutual support thing.
Perfect opportunity for a partnership to form to be the basis for lifelong romance. Another rapid fire question: what can you tell us about running a 6th grade balloon business?
Oh, goodness. I was in 6th grade, and I don't even remember whose idea it was. I kind of think it was probably my mom's, but maybe it was mine. I was pretty entrepreneurial. I had been a very good Girl Scout cookie sales girl, and I was always saving my money and trying to find ways to make money. And somebody came up with the idea that I have this balloon business, and we rented a helium tank. And I think my parents must have given me some seed money or something for it to get started. But then as it went on, I kept very careful inventory of how many of every color and of different colors of ribbons. And, we bought all the supplies at the party store, and we rented a helium tank. And of course, through my parents' network of friends, people would hire me to bring them bouquets of balloons for parties, or I did a wedding. I did my 6th grade graduation dance. I did quite a lot. And I don't think overall I probably profited a ton, but I did a lot of learning how a business runs, and how you have to profit enough, and how you've got to, keep track of your inventory, and, all of that. So it was pretty fun. And I probably did it for about a year. But yeah, that was the balloon business.
The experience alone must have been something you carried with you forever. That's fantastic.
And I really should use it in a middle grade novel eventually.
Well, no, now we talked about it, and 10 more books about balloon businesses
Right.
are being written right now.
Take it and fly.
I have a wonderful idea for a new middle grade novel. Am I going to tell anybody about it on the show? Never.
Yeah.
You'll find out about it when it's available. And then one more rapid fire question. You are a certified aerobics instructor, which seems to be not opposite of everything you've been doing, but so it's just everything else kind of that fits, that makes sense. So playwriting, yes, acting, that tracks. How did you become a certified aerobics instructor?
Well, I will say my certification has lapsed many, many years ago. I am no longer a certified aerobics instructor. No, that was just in college. Well, all through high school, I did aerobics. At the time, that was the 90s. Step aerobics was the thing. I don't know if it even still is. And then into college, there was a really great health center. And so there was a lot of different kinds of aerobics there that I did. And I kind of am the kind of person that if I'm going to do something, I want to do it like the best I can. I want to know everything about it, and I want to be at the level where I could instruct it. I've backed off that a little bit as I've gotten older, but definitely in my 20s, I was like, well, I'm not going to just do aerobics. I want to know everything there is to know and be able to teach aerobics. And there was also like a performance element of it. I thought the way an aerobics teacher really has to be prepared with their routines, and has to be up in front of everybody and keeping an eye on everybody else. But, putting on enough of an engaging show that people want to come along with them. There were definitely teachers whose classes I would never miss, because of how it wasn't just about the exercise, right? It was about they were funny, they were engaging, they made me want to be there. So I think that was what drew me in, sort of my desire to master it, and also as a theater person or as any kind of creative, I think you're always looking for something that might be a way to make money, on the side while doing theater. So yeah, and so I went through a whole long training, and I had this big textbook that I had to learn everything in, and I had to go to this testing center and take this hours long. It was like taking the SAT, all kinds of stuff about, anatomy and whatnot. But yeah, I haven't done it for years and years and years. Now I am more of a yoga person, and I have had the thought, and this comes from my desire to master things, of, it'd be cool to do yoga teacher training, but I don't think that is ever going to happen in this lifetime. I need to sort of let go of the need to master things and know that some things I can just experience them.
No, you're going to get your own yoga studio, and you're going to bring back the helium tank, and it's going to be a form of balloon yoga.
Well, that's a thought.
Well, keep it in mind. My final question for you is, it's always some variation. This is my catch-all question for all the things I should have asked you about and just didn't think to do it during our conversation. But if there was one thing you could go back to you, a younger version of you, at any point in the spectrum, be like, maybe toward the start of your writing journey, maybe in the middle, some essential advice or multiple bits of advice you could go back and give yourself that would have made a huge difference and maybe would benefit all the writers listening now, what would that be?
I think that I wouldn't want to do anything differently. So I wouldn't advise myself to have done anything differently, because I feel like everything I have done and everything I have gone through has built me to the place I am, and that it took a long time. But I think what I would want that younger self to know, or I would want other people listening to this, particularly ones who are on a harder road, who have been doing this a while and feel like they'll never get there. I would want them to know that for me, and this may not be the case for everyone, but I hope that at least in my story, it's inspiring. I feel like where I ended up is where I was supposed to end up. And that 10th book, I am so glad that was my debut novel, that I didn't debut with any of the earlier books. That was the right book at the right time, with the right editor and the right agent. at the right stage of my life. If this had happened 10 years ago when my children were toddlers, just completely different stage of my life. And, I would have made it work in its way. But for me now, it took the time it took. But I'm so grateful that it ended or started where it did, that this was what was right in my trajectory. And so I would wish that sort of peace to someone who is struggling and feeling like they'll never get there. I get it. I was there for years. But I would just say that for me, the journey was worth it. And I feel like I'm in a much better place to now move forward and go further than I would have been if things had happened at an earlier stage. So you're on the journey you're on, and maybe you get published with your first book, and that's great, and that comes with its own stresses too. And maybe you're on a longer journey, and if you are, it will be worth it when it comes.
I hope every writer listening is going to clip that and make it their ringtone. And every time they're discouraged, they're going to go back and they're going to listen to it, and it'll be, Serenity now.
I would be very honored.
Joy McCullough, where can esteemed audience find you online? Where can they find more information about you, your books, all that good stuff?
Yes, my website is joymccullough.com, and I just hired someone to help me keep it updated because it hadn't had field guide on it until like a week ago. So hopefully I'll stay more on top of it. And then I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram at JMC Writes. And I'm very accessible on both of those platforms. So say hi and I will say hi back.
As always, esteemed audience, find me at middlegradeninja.com. You know who I am. Get your copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, etc., etc. Trent, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for making the time and for this wonderful conversation we've been able to enjoy. I really appreciate it. It's been an absolute highlight of my day and of my year.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so pleased. I really enjoyed being here.
And if you would, I've learned that professional type podcasts have sign-off phrases. So I always ask our guests to say our sign-off phrase, which totally justifies the name of the show because it's so ninja-like. And that sign-off phrase is hi-ya and what have you. Will you sign us off?
Hi-ya and what have you.